Break a one. Might be crazy, but I ain't dumb. Crazy Cooter coming at you.
It's non-stop action. Never a dull moment.
He played a grease-stained mechanic in a small southern town, cracking jokes and fixing up broken-down cars for good old boys outrunning the law. But behind that lovable screen persona lived a man whose real story was wilder, more complicated, and more deeply American than anything written in a Hollywood script. Ben Jones spent decades as Cooter Davenport, then walked away from Hazzard County and walked straight into the halls of Congress. When he died on August 9, 2026, the family he left behind discovered that the fortune behind his name told a story that made many of them weep. The unlikely rise of Ben Jones. There is something almost cinematic about the way Ben Jones entered the world. Born on August 30, 1941, in Tarboro, North Carolina, he was raised in Portsmouth, Virginia, where his father, Buck, worked for the Atlantic Coastline Railroad. The family lived in a railroad shack near the docks, a dwelling without electricity or indoor plumbing, where barefoot summers stretched long and money stayed scarce. That kind of childhood either breaks a person or builds something stubborn in them. And in Ben Jones, it built something unforgettable. His mother, Ela, the youngest of 13 children, kept the home together as a full-time homemaker, while young Ben grew up dreaming about wherever those railroad tracks out of Portsmouth might lead. He attended Woodrow Wilson High School, graduating in 1959, and eventually made his way to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where something clicked the moment he stepped into a theater rehearsal. He performed with the Carolina Playmakers, the university's storied dramatic group, and never quite recovered from the love of performance that gripped him there. To earn money during his student years, Jones worked summer stock productions and performed in the outdoor drama Unto These Hills in Cherokee, North Carolina, a historical pageant that gave him his first real taste of live audiences and storytelling. After finishing at Chapel Hill, he relocated to Atlanta in 1969, where he found work with the Alliance Theater, the Atlanta Children's Theater, and the Theater of the Stars. He appeared in more than 100 theater productions during those years, building the kind of stage foundation that television training rarely provides. His most significant early film role came in 1975 when he appeared in Moonrunners, an independent picture about bootleggers directed by Guy Waldron and featuring narration by country singer Waylon Jennings. That film would prove far more important than its modest release suggested, because Waldron had larger ambitions. When that bootlegging story evolved into a television project for CBS, Jones was among the first brought in to audition. The Dukes of Hazzard launched on CBS in January 1979, and Ben Jones stepped into the role of Cooter Davenport, the mechanic and record driver who operated the only garage in the fictional Hazzard County, Georgia. The setup was almost perfectly designed for audience affection. Cooter owned the only tow truck in a town where the main characters spent most of their time crashing cars. Every time the General Lee got banged up, every time Bo or Luke Duke needed a fast repair, Crazy Cooter was already sliding out from under a vehicle, wrenching away, ready to help. Jones appeared in 141 episodes of the show across all 7 of its original seasons, which ran through February 1985. The series became one of the biggest hits on American television, ranking second in the Nielsen ratings during the 1979 to 1980 season, trailing only Dallas, which conveniently followed it on Friday nights on CBS. And Cooter, with his CB handle and his easy laugh, became one of the show's most beloved recurring figures. Even with the fame, Ben Jones never lost the rougher edges of his early years. He had married 3 times before his 40th birthday, lived through periods of heavy drinking, and carried the kind of personal turbulence that often walks alongside restless ambition. By his own later account, he got sober at 36, a turning point that reshaped everything that followed. In one of the most memorable lines he ever committed to paper, Jones later wrote of his recovery, "I got sober the day before I died." During the second season of the show, Jones briefly left the series over a creative dispute about whether Cooter should be unshaven or clean-shaven. In his absence, Several characters appeared filling Cooter's role, described loosely as various cousins. Jones returned once the disagreement was resolved, and Cooter's clean-shaven look carried through the rest of the series. It was a small moment, but a revealing one. Ben Jones had opinions. He held them firmly, and sometimes that created friction before the path forward became clear. When the show ended in 1985, most cast members faced the challenge that haunts beloved television characters, the difficulty of stepping out from under a role that the public refuses to separate from the actor. Jones handled that challenge differently from almost anyone else in the cast. He did not chase auditions. He ran for Congress. The congressman who never left Hazzard County. Few transitions in American entertainment history carried the kind of clean audacity that Ben Jones brought to politics. The show had ended. The ratings peak had passed. And while the reruns kept playing and the fan letters kept arriving, Jones had turned his attention to something most television actors had never considered as a next chapter. His first congressional run came in 1986, when he challenged Georgia Republican incumbent Pat Swindoll for a seat representing Georgia's 4th congressional district. Most observers expected the celebrity challenger to make a respectable showing and then disappear back into the entertainment world. Instead, Jones pulled 47% of the vote, losing narrowly, but signaling something political organizers immediately recognized. The name recognition was real, and the connection to working-class voters in Georgia was genuine. He ran again in 1988, and this time he won convincingly, defeating Swindoll with 60% of the vote. On January 3, 1989, Ben Lewis Jones was sworn into the 101st United States Congress as a Democratic member from Georgia's 4th District. The former garage mechanic of Hazzard County had become the Honorable Ben Jones of the United States House of Representatives. During his time in Washington, Jones served on the Committee on Public Works and Transportation and the Committee on Merchant Marine and Fisheries, committees that aligned with the practical needs of his Georgia constituents. He was narrowly re-elected in 1990, returning for a second term. His time in office was marked by the kind of plain-spoken advocacy that aligned closely with the character he had spent years playing on television. The political career faced a difficult end through redistricting rather than scandal. Following the 1990 census, the boundaries of Georgia's 4th District shifted in ways that moved Jones's own home into a different district. Running in the 1992 Democratic primary in his redrawn area, he was defeated. The congressional chapter closed after 4 years. He did not retreat quietly, running in 1994 against Newt Gingrich, the then House Minority Whip, who would soon become Speaker of the House. The race was not close, but running it said something characteristic about the man. After leaving Washington, Jones returned to what he had always understood deeply, the hold that Hazzard County had on American popular imagination. In 1999, he and his wife Alma Viator opened Cooter's Place, a museum and themed store dedicated to the Dukes of Hazzard in Sperryville, Virginia. The concept worked immediately. Fans who had grown up watching the show traveled to browse memorabilia, meet the man who had played Cooter, and spend money in the gift shop. Jones and Viator expanded the business to multiple locations, eventually operating stores in Pigeon Forge and Nashville, Tennessee, as well as Luray, Virginia. The biggest fan events Jones organized drew remarkable numbers. A Dukes Fest gathering in Nashville in 2006 pulled in more than 100,000 fans from across the world, a figure the Tennessean described as the largest turnout ever recorded for a fan event in that city. That number illustrated how deeply the show had lodged itself in American cultural memory, and how effectively Jones had positioned himself as its unofficial custodian. He also kept recording music throughout this period, performing with Cooter's Garage Band at concerts, festivals, and fan gatherings across the country. The band released more than a dozen albums over the years, with an additional recording arriving in 2020 titled Play Me an Old Song. Music had always run through Jones's life, and the band gave him another platform to stay connected with the fans who had never stopped caring about Hazzard County. In 2007, Random House published Jones's memoir, Redneck Boy in the Promised Land, The Confessions of Crazy Cooter, a candid account of his upbringing in the railroad shacks of Portsmouth, his battle with alcoholism, his improbable television fame, and his even more improbable congressional career. Written with unsparing honesty, the memoir covered territory far beyond what most Hollywood biographies dare to examine. He wrote about participating in civil rights sit-ins during the 1960s, a fact that added unexpected depth to the portrait of a man the public mostly knew through a fictional Southern mechanic. Taken together, those post-congressional decades reveal a man who refused to let his most famous role become the last word on who he was, building something real and lasting from the loyalty that fame had generated, the fortune he left behind, and why his family wept. On August 9, 2026, a Sunday afternoon in Washington, Virginia, Ben Jones settled into his favorite chair at home and waited for the Atlanta Braves to play the New York Yankees. He never saw the first pitch. His wife, Alma Viator, later announced on Facebook that he had died of a massive heart attack while sitting in that chair, quietly waiting for the game to come on. The tributes arrived quickly. Tom Wopat, who played Luke Duke across all 7 seasons of the Dukes of Hazzard, described Jones as a fine friend and fierce advocate, adding that the cast had lost a Duke cousin. Viator's message stayed in people's minds for days. Ben had the most amazing, rich, full life, she wrote. He loved and was loved by so many. He will be missed. I loved him so much. Jones was survived by Viator, his 5th wife, whom he had married on October 10, 1992, and by his children, a daughter named Rachel, whom he had with his earlier wife, Mary Alice Beale, a second daughter named Jean, and a son named Walker, born in 1983 with his then-wife, Vivian Walker Jones. He was also stepfather to 3 additional children through his marriage to Viator. When the question of his financial estate began circulating in the days after his death, the numbers that emerged told a more complicated story than the life itself suggested. Celebrity net worth had long estimated Ben Jones's fortune at around $500,000, a figure reflecting the particular financial reality of a career spent across multiple lower-paying fields. Television character actors, even beloved ones from hit shows, rarely accumulate the same wealth as lead stars. Congressional salaries in the late 1980s and early 1990s were modest by any standard. Some outlets cited figures closer to $2 million, accounting for the accumulated value of the Cooter's Place brand. The real estate tied to the log cabin and farm property Jones and Viator had purchased in Rappahannock County, Virginia in 1998, and the various business assets connected to Dukes Fest and merchandise operations. The IB Times reported that estimates placed his net worth at approximately $2 million at the time of his death, though the precise figure depended heavily on how the business holdings were valued. What became clear was that the financial picture, whatever the precise figure, landed differently on his family than outsiders might have expected. For people who had watched Jones remain active, run a thriving fan business, record music, publish a memoir, and maintain a devoted public following well into his 80s, the numbers carried a particular kind of weight. A life that had seemed so full, so varied, so constantly in motion, had generated a modest estate by the standards of celebrity wealth. That disparity between the scale of a man's presence in the world and the size of what remained behind in financial terms was what moved his loved ones to tears. Jones had written openly in his memoir about the financial chaos of his earlier years. 3 marriages before his 40th birthday, periods of heavy drinking, and the unpredictable income of a working actor had all left marks. By the time he got sober and began making clearer decisions, he was building from a deficit that took decades to work through. The Cooter's Place business represented his most sustained and successful entrepreneurial effort, and it came relatively late in a life that had moved through many phases before settling into that final productive chapter. His congressional papers, donated to the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia, sit in 78 cubic feet of archived material, documenting not just his legislative work, but the full arc of what it meant to be a working entertainer who stepped into public service without a safety net beneath him. What cannot be measured in any estate valuation is the fact that The Dukes of Hazzard still airs in syndication around the world, that the Cooter's Place museums he and Viator built still stand, and that tens of millions of people carry a warm memory of a fictional mechanic in a fictional Georgia county who made them feel week after week that decency and loyalty were always going to be enough. The legacy of Crazy Cooter and what history will remember. Not many people manage to become iconic in one field and then build a second career of genuine consequence in a completely different one. Fewer still do both, while also running a successful business, recording a dozen albums, and writing a critically received memoir. Ben Jones did all of it, and the full weight of that accomplishment becomes clearer with distance. The Dukes of Hazzard gave Jones something that most actors spend entire careers trying to find: a character the public loved without reservation. Cooter Davenport was not the hero of the show, not the romantic lead, not the character the camera followed into every scene. He was the mechanic, the man who kept the vehicles running, showed up when needed, and left people smiling when he did. There is real art in playing that kind of role without letting it disappear into the background, and Jones performed it with enough warmth and specificity that audiences never confused Cooter with anyone else. His decision to enter politics after the show ended demonstrated something unusual about his self-understanding. Most actors in his position would have continued auditioning, hoping that recognition from a hit show would open new doors in Hollywood. Jones looked at his situation differently. The show had given him a genuine connection to working-class communities, particularly in the South, that most celebrity-driven political campaigns spend enormous money trying to manufacture. He had grown up without money. He understood what it felt like to live close to the economic margin, and Georgia voters recognized that understanding as authentic. His willingness to challenge Newt Gingrich in 1994, long after redistricting had ended his competitive political career, said something important about his character. That race was never going to produce a congressional victory. Jones ran it anyway, because the fight mattered to him more than the calculation about winning. The memoir he published, Redneck Boy in the Promised Land, added another dimension to the public record of his life. Books by television actors often stay safely on the surface, offering pleasant anecdotes and carefully managed revelations. Jones went deeper. He wrote about alcoholism with the specificity of someone who had nearly lost everything to it. He wrote about failed marriages without vanity or self-protection. He wrote about the civil rights movement and his own participation in its risks, at a time when doing so carried real personal cost for a young white Southerner. That willingness to engage honestly with his own contradictions set the memoir apart from almost everything else in the television actor genre. His music career, sustained across more than a dozen albums and performances at festivals and fan gatherings throughout the country, provided another thread running through the later decades of his life. Playing concerts let him stay in motion, stay connected to audiences, and keep doing something he genuinely loved, rather than simply trading on past fame. The Cooter's Place museums, meanwhile, represented the most lasting practical legacy he created alongside Viator, built from scratch without the financial backing that typically supports celebrity-branded ventures. The Dukes Fest gathering that drew more than 100,000 people to Nashville in 2006 was not a corporate production. It was the work of two people who understood their audience and built something real for them year after year, with consistency and genuine care. When the Atlanta Braves game that Ben Jones never got to watch eventually ended that Sunday evening in August 2026, a man who had escaped railroad poverty and built something extraordinary across 8 decades had already left the room. His family gathered in the grief of that loss and in the complicated feelings that come when a life of such unusual fullness produces a financial inheritance smaller than the legend surrounding it. But fortunes measured in dollars were never quite the point with Ben Jones. He measured his in the 141 episodes he gave to a show that still runs on television screens around the world. In the 4 years he spent fighting for his Georgia constituents in Congress. In the thousands of fans who made their way to Cooter's place and shook his hand. In the memoir that told the truth about a life that could have gone very differently. And in the sobriety that made all the rest of it possible. What he left behind made his family cry, not because it was too little, but because it forced them to reckon with how much of himself he had poured out into the world, to every audience, every voter, every fan who needed Crazy Cooter to still be out there, wrench in hand, keeping the cars running and the laughter going. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you've been watching till now, we truly appreciate you. A thumbs up, a share, and a subscription to our channel mean everything to us and help us keep bringing you stories like this. Drop a comment below telling us what you remember about the Dukes of Hazzard, and we'll see you in the next video.